When we talk about politics in America, especially around figures like Donald Trump, one of the key topics that always comes up is negotiation. Some see Trump as a businessman who brought his deal-making strategies into politics, while others question whether those methods truly served the American people. But in a recent discussion, Representative Jason Smith pointed out something important. Trump is willing to negotiate with anyone if it means delivering results for Americans. This statement might sound simple, but it carries a lot of weight. In global politics, negotiation is everything. No single country can exist in isolation. Every decision about trade, defense, security, energy, or even cultural exchanges involves talks between different nations. The ability to sit down at the table, even with rivals, often defines whether a country prospers or struggles. And Trump's supporters argue that he understood this reality better than many politicians before him. Trump's slogan, "America First," was not just about looking inward, it was also about rethinking the way America engaged with the world. Instead of following the same patterns of diplomacy that had been used for decades, he often chose a direct approach. Sometimes he praised world leaders, sometimes he criticized them, but in almost every case he made clear that if there was a benefit for the American people, he was willing to talk. That's what Representative Jason Smith meant when he said Trump will negotiate with anyone. Let's break this down further. On the global stage, negotiation can happen with allies, partners, and even with adversaries. For example, when it comes to allies like NATO members, Trump was known for pushing them to contribute more financially. Critics said he was being too harsh, but his supporters argued that it was a negotiation tactic, reminding wealthier nations to pay their fair share so American taxpayers weren't a T carrying the whole burden. In business terms, that was Trump applying leverage, a classic deal-making strategy. On the other side, consider adversaries like North Korea. For decades, U.S. presidents had avoided face-to-face meetings with the North Korean leader, worried that it would legitimize a dictator. Trump, however, flipped the script. He met with Kim Jong-un, exchanged strong words and even personal letters, and showed the world a very different style of negotiation. While not all of those talks produced concrete results, the fact that dialogue was opened at all was groundbreaking. For Trump supporters, it was proof that he was willing to negotiate with anyone, even America's toughest opponents, if it meant reducing the risk of war or finding opportunities for peace. Now, this approach also matters for communities within America, including Muslims. When leaders are willing to engage in dialogue, it sets a tone. Instead of isolating groups or treating them as outsiders, the message becomes one of inclusion. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, there's room at the table. For American Muslims who often feel the weight of global conflicts being projected onto their communities, the idea of leaders negotiating rather than fighting can bring a sense of hope. Peaceful resolutions abroad often mean less discrimination at home, less fear, and more opportunities to thrive as part of the American story. Representative Jason Smith's statement also reflects something about Trump's image as a practical leader. Supporters often describe him as results-driven rather than ideology-driven. That means instead of sticking to one rigid view, he adapts based on the circumstances. If negotiating with a rival brings cheaper energy prices, more jobs, or stronger security, then it's worth doing. This is something that resonates with ordinary Americans because most people, regardless of politics, just want stability, jobs, and safety for their families. Let's also talk about trade negotiations. Under Trump, America took a much tougher stance on trade agreements. With countries like China, Trump imposed tariffs and demanded better terms. While some critics said this created economic tensions, supporters argue it forced competitors to take America more seriously. The idea was simple. America shouldn't be taken advantage of in trade deals. For Muslim-majority nations that engage in trade with the U.S., this tougher stance wasn't always negative. Many of these nations saw opportunities to strengthen partnerships with America, especially in areas like energy and agriculture, where mutual benefit could be found. When it comes to foreign policy, negotiation also extends to the Middle East. Trump's administration made headlines with the Abraham Accords, agreements that normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Now, opinions on this move vary, and it's important to acknowledge that. Some praised it as a historic breakthrough, while others felt it didn't go far enough in addressing the Palestinian struggle. But what stands out is the fact that negotiations were happening at all, opening doors for dialogue that had been closed for decades. For Muslims worldwide, the hope is always that such negotiations eventually lead to justice, peace, and fairness for all parties involved, including Palestinians. At the same time, Trump also pushed for the U.S. to reduce military entanglements in the Middle East, something many Muslim Americans quietly welcomed. The idea of bringing troops home and focusing resources on domestic growth aligns with the desire for less conflict and more diplomacy. Negotiating instead of fighting means fewer innocent lives lost, fewer refugee crises, and more chances for families to live in safety. Another point worth exploring is how negotiation affects the American economy at home. Representative Jason Smith's remarks highlight that every negotiation Trump pursued was framed around delivering for Americans. Lower taxes, stronger trade deals, and fairer contributions from allies were all presented as ways to boost the lives of working families. For Muslim Americans who own small businesses, work in manufacturing, or contribute to growing industries, these policies could mean real economic benefits. Access to better markets, fair competition, and stronger consumer spending all feed into opportunities for every community in America. Negotiation also plays a role in immigration and cultural exchange. Trump's policies in this area were often controversial, but if we step back and look at the bigger picture, the theme of negotiation still applies. His administration sought deals with other countries to manage borders and enforce immigration rules. Supporters argue that this was about creating order in the system, ensuring that those who come to America have a fair shot without being undercut by chaos at the borders. For Muslim immigrants and their families, the hope is that future negotiations in this area strike a balance between security and compassion, so that people fleeing hardship can still find opportunity without facing discrimination. Representative Jason Smith's comment also reminds us that negotiation is not weakness, it's strength. Sitting down with opponents doesn't mean surrendering, it means having the confidence to face difficult conversations. For Muslims, this concept has deep roots in history. The Prophet Muhammad himself engaged in negotiations and treaties, even with groups that opposed him, to ensure peace and stability for his people. In the same way, modern leaders who are willing to negotiate signal that they value dialogue over destruction. It's also worth noting that negotiation requires listening as much as talking. Trump's style was often seen as bold, even brash, but behind the scenes, effective negotiation involves understanding what the other side values. Supporters say Trump had a way of reading people, identifying leverage, and then using that to push for better terms. Whether it was allies in Europe, rivals in Asia, or partners in the Middle East, the ability to find common ground while standing firm on America's interests was central to his approach. This doesn't mean every negotiation ended in success. Politics is messy, and international relations are full of complications. But the willingness to engage, rather than isolate, is what Representative Jason Smith highlighted as a key strength. For Muslim Americans, and really for all Americans, this willingness has ripple effects. It sets the stage for a world where conflict is reduced and cooperation is possible. It builds an environment where communities can focus on building lives, businesses, and futures instead of constantly worrying about wars overseas. Trump's negotiating style also brought a sense of unpredictability. World leaders didn't always know how he would approach a situation, and that uncertainty itself became a bargaining tool. Some saw this as risky, while others believed it gave America an advantage. In negotiations, being unpredictable can sometimes force the other side to take you more seriously, to offer better terms just to avoid confrontation. For Muslims, both in America and abroad, unpredictability had mixed effects. On one hand, it created anxiety because sudden policy shifts could affect visas, travel, or international relations. On the other hand, it also opened doors to possibilities that seemed unthinkable before, like new peace talks or trade opportunities. The key is that negotiation, even when unpredictable, kept the lines of communication open. At its core, Representative Jason Smith's statement captures the essence of leadership in a complex world. A leader who is willing to negotiate with anyone shows adaptability, pragmatism, and determination. For Americans, it means someone is always looking out for their interests. For Muslims, it means there is a chance to see dialogue instead of demonization, cooperation instead of conflict, and inclusion instead of exclusion.